Be sure to subscribe and like our channel. We are here at the Queen City Curio and Apothecary live again as usual, because live radio is where it's at, my friends, not podcast. Believe it or not, live radio is where the shit happens. Still. And eventually, like we said, we keep saying every week, we're working on getting on actual live radio with the podcast. I mean, actual live radio through Toronto College Radio, probably, but we'll still try to get a live show. Why? Because more live stuff happens. That's where we come from. That's where we've been. And that's the future, my friends. Podcasts are too easy to modify. Take out the bad parts, take out the good parts. Instead, with live radio, live YouTube channel, back to it, you get what you get, which is important because it's like weird stuff happens and we love it. We love it. So we are at 607 Gerrard Street East, in case you're wondering, and it's the first time. This is the Queen City Curio podcast and videocast. The podcast is still, you know us, you love us. We've been here for like 5 years, maybe more, deeper down the rabbit hole.
Yes, we have.
Yes, we have. Today we have a guest that we have met several times in person at convocations in the fine Motor City of Michigan. Many times, although which is next week, although I'm not going to be there this year, but if everyone wants me back, just invite me, I'll come back. Like, so
yep,
hopefully by then COVID is under control more. Or at least I've lost 100 pounds, so I don't care if I get it.
There you
One
go.
of the two. There you go. There. Motivational messages there for myself. But we've been there. We've had today's guest today on the show several times. Not only that, we've seen them in person several times. Sometimes we've even actually broken bread together.
Yeah. We go back a long ways, like like over 10 years, like maybe 15 years, I think.
Yeah, it's a crazy long amount, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not been as successful this year at writing books as Jason has, who has written like 3 books this year. Like I just need book partners, because I noticed a lot of your new books, they have book partners.
It's true, yeah. But I mean, still, this is the latest one that came out in December.
That's the latest one, yes.
That's the latest one.
It's still like I still wrote half of it, and it's about 300 pages. So I mean, it's a lot of book work,
Yeah, it is actually, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. Now, in case you don't know who Jason Mankey is, he is known throughout, I don't know, everywhere for doing Dionysian rituals.
And pan rituals.
Everywhere.
And pan rituals.
Rituals.
Yeah.
So Dionysus and pan rituals everywhere. They're like across the world, pretty much. I think that's true at this point.
Across the world is a pretty big statement, but a lot of places.
I at least have remembered you doing occasional Canadian events, so you're at least international.
I did. I have done those rituals in Canada, so international. So US and Canada. And I've done book signings in London. But I mean, that's really the extent of my international.
But you've already crossed one whole ocean at that point. Okay, so that's
a new continent.
Yeah.
I have not even done book signings in London, although I heard my book got translated to French, which I was going to get. So I could learn French. I was going to buy it just so I could learn French.
Because then I get Parisian French specifically.
I have a couple of my books in French, and I can't read them, even though I took high school French. But I just feel more sophisticated knowing my writing is also in French. Yeah.
So, yeah, like I think. In Canada, you get extra. The government likes you better if you know French.
Yeah.
Oui.
So it's a good idea if I learn French.
I'm in California, which is kind of like Canada, maybe, except the weather's better, right? I mean, it's our progressive bastion of the United States.
It really is. It really is.
It really is.
If I had to leave like Toronto and go back to the States, I would strongly consider California.
Cali, yeah.
it worked for Tupac.
There you go. There
you go.
So we're gonna today. Let's hold up the book again, real fast. Which we're gonna try to get a copy in the library. We're gonna beg Llewellyn, if you're listening. Come on, 5 years.
Send us a book.
Send us a book, so we can have a library. Like, we're building up our Greek library too. I mean, we've got a copy of the PGM. We've got multiple books on Hecate. We've got a couple books on the hymns, and now we have a general guidebook on how to work with the various Greek gods. You want to send us a book. That's the book that's missing. It's the one you got to send us.
That's the book
right there. Jason's book, Modern, working with modern. I think it's modern witchcraft with Greek gods. Greek gods.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the Greek gods again. Of course, I always start when we talk about these shows to say basically I almost never like working with the Olympians and always work with the other side of the Greek gods, which is, Nyx, Hecate, the dark gods, all the Tartarus space gods.
I mean, some of them are in this book too.
They are.
We tried to cover all the bases.
So what convinced you to write a book about the Greek gods?
I've had a love affair with the Greek gods since probably second grade, back when I read my first book of Greek myths and was calling Persephone Persephone because I did not know how to pronounce any of those names. And I remember uttering my first prayer to Zeus in second grade. In ninth grade, I made like a really awful Greek temple out of clay in art class to Venus, to Aphrodite, because I wanted a girlfriend, and I thought that would be the way.
Yeah. Did it work?
No, it didn't work. I really didn't know what the hell I was doing magically, so it didn't really work, at least long term, so, but it was still.
Well, that means it did work short term.
I mean, there were girlfriends periodically, but I never had that like big high school relationship, that lasted for like a year or two, right? It was like maybe months, weeks, I don't know. I was always never happy. It was my own fault. I had some really nice girlfriends, but I was kind of just an idiot. So, with age comes wisdom sometimes. Not much wisdom in my case, but a little bit. But anyways, a long love affair with the Greek gods. And I met Andrieh Taylor at Pagan Spirit Gathering in 2017. She co-wrote this book with me, and we were just talking about her love of the Greek gods. And apparently I said to her, we should write a book about the Greek gods together. After knowing her for like 24 hours, I was probably not sober. And she remembered it. And then we talked about it on and off for a couple of years, but we both had our own projects. And then the pandemic hit.
So it's almost like the god of wine, who you have often served, came and blessed you with inspiration to say something that you might not normally say. And then it became a reality.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, Dionysus is always kind of there, looming in the background, finding us places to live, pushing forward with book ideas. But yeah, I mean, so the idea for this book has been around for like 5 or 6 years. Yeah. And then we started writing it in 2020, as I said, during the pandemic, which was, something to do when I couldn't go anywhere. Yeah.
Did you find a process, since you have some books that you wrote by yourself? You have this book. Did you find a process of working with really someone you didn't know? Like, was it like a fruitful sort of relationship that you're like, yeah, this is pretty awesome to have a book partner?
Yeah, but in a lot of ways, I felt really kind of siloed while we were writing. It was, I'm going to write this part, you're going to write that part. And there's only one chapter where I think we really collaborated, where you can find her words and my words in the same chapter. And I think it just says it's written by her because I just added a couple paragraphs here and there. So it's a partnership in that I didn't have to do all the work. And there were things like we would kind of critique each other's chapters lightly, but not a whole lot, so it was really not much different than some of the other books I've written. And I've done 3 collaborative books so far. There was The Witch's Altar with Laura Tempest Zakroff. And then I did a book called The Witch's Book of Spellcraft with 3 members of my coven. And that was a completely different writing experience because they weren't professional writers. Andrieh had written books before, Tempest had written books before. And in that case, it was more like they were just kind of giving me ideas in the spellcraft book, and I was turning them into, a book.
That's very interesting. I'd love to talk about that, because it's like you have this relationship with a coven and you're writing spells. Like, how did it go? Like how did the process go? And like, how did it strengthen your relationships? Did it kind of make things more interesting? Did it just make you write down stuff that you otherwise were doing on the fly?
It strengthened our relationships, absolutely. But again, that was most of that was written in 2020 during the pandemic too. So it was also really frustrating because we had this idea of how we were going to write the book together. We were going to go into our ritual space. I was going to watch them put together spells, because they were all three very good at doing spells. Matt Cavalli, Amanda Lynn, and my wife Ari were the other contributors. They're great spell putter togethers. Not, I'm going to sit down and write a spell, but intuition's going to guide me and I'm going to do this thing. And I was just going to sit and watch them work. And because of the pandemic, we could never do that, right? Couldn't be inside at the same time. Got to do it once, but we also had like a bunch of wildfires in California at the same time. So like we couldn't open our windows in our houses, and you couldn't do all kinds of things, right? You had COVID and then you had like no air that was breathable. So it was really frustrating. But it was nice to get people's ideas, because I think there are so many different ideas about magic. And I always try not to write in absolutes. So having 3 other opinions was really useful, right? Because then I could kind of incorporate their ideas with my own to have like sort of a bigger picture of how different witches do stuff magically.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I mean, like, no, we'll keep talking. I mean, it's kind of funny because the pandemic has often been a topic of the show that we just sort of gravitate to. And yeah, I mean, like, I still think people socially are probably, I mean, still reeling. Like, they're trying to act like it's back to normal, but it's not yet. So like, there's a lot of kind of people still trying to figure out those boundaries, not the boundaries, but getting those relationships back or reestablishing new ones. That exactly like what you're talking about. Like, it's a lot easier to do ritual in person than get on Zoom and try to do ritual.
Yeah.
Like we were writing the spells for this, and eventually it ended up just kind of being like Google Docs and that sort of thing, and Zoom calls. And it's just not the same as actually doing the spell with other people. And then when you're doing it with materials instead of just writing, you can notice like everything that you're doing, right? And if you're not a writer, sometimes it's hard to get all of the steps that you're actually doing down on a keyboard or writing it as a note. Like I would get spells from the kids that were the kids. They're like not that much younger than me, but they are all younger than me. My collaborators. And I was like, yeah, but what about this step? Like, because I know that you're doing something here and you're not writing that down, and it has to be written down in a book. Right. So I'd get these like little spell ideas, and then I would have to Llewellynize them, make them like bigger and meatier and longer and like really fully explained. And yeah, so writing is a process, and learning how to write books that tell people how to do something is a skill that takes a long time, I think, to really master. And if you're just trying it for the first time, there's going to be a lot of trial and a lot of error, like so many errors.
Probably not so much error as in like what you're describing, right? Like it's not enough for somebody to understand how to do what you want to do, because so it's like a first draft of the milestones for the ritual, and then you have to actually write down the second draft. Is somebody has to come through and say, I'm a noob and I don't understand this part. There's
a lot of omissions, I think. Maybe that's a good way to put it. Like, a first time person trying to write these things down, you're going to just assume that there are steps that everybody knows, and that's usually not the case. If they knew it, they probably they wouldn't buy the book.
Yeah.
So But yeah, it's great though that I've been able to work with other people now, though. To have 3 books written with other people, just you learn what people's processes are, and they're can be very, very different. Laura Tempest Zakharov had like the best process. I'm like a really slow writer, and I'm always worried that I'm never going to have a deadline on time or whatever, and it can take me like 4 or 5 hours to write 1,000 words. And 2 months before the book's due, I'm like asking her like, how far along are you? And she's like, I'm getting ready to start. And then
all right, now before we go into the Greek book, which we are going to talk about, I want to know what the process was here, because how the
I want to know too.
like really, like how did that work? Because I'm thinking if I had like 2 months, I just wrote like 80 pages article, and I was like had 2 months, and I'm like I almost cried every day because I'm like I only got like 1,000 words. So like to even start there, I'm kind of like, how did this work exactly?
Again, it was one of those where we just sort of divided up what we were going to write. So I had 6 chapters to write. She had 6 chapters to write, but she writes fast. Some people just can write quickly, and then really she does like all of the editing like in the second phase. I like all of my sentences to be perfect when I hit the period at the end, right? And she's like that, and it works for her. Like she's a brilliant writer. Like some of her books, like her Sigil Magic book is the best book about sigil magic probably anyone will ever pick up. Especially if you're a beginner and you want something that's accessible. But yeah, she writes really fast, and that was fascinating to me because it was the exact opposite of me. I'm like, every couple of weeks, I got this many pages done and stuff. And she's like, yeah, whatever. I'll get there.
So going back to the Greek gods book, now obviously, Dionysus, but was your second favorite god or goddess to write about in the book?
So I really went out of my way not to write the histories of the gods that I'm really super familiar with. So I didn't write the histories of Pan or Dionysus. The only goddess or deity at all that I was like super close to that I got to write the history part for was Aphrodite. So that was really fun. And I've done workshops on Aphrodite before, but this was a challenge because a lot of times those workshops, the sources I used for them were like really super academic and hard for people to follow. So now I had to write something that was a little bit more accessible and sort of, which was sort of a 180 from how I was approaching her doing workshops. I love that. I'm not a big Hecate person, but I really loved writing about her in the book. That was one of my favorite chapters to write. There's just something about her history that's really fascinating because it's sort of off the main path, right? It's just a little bit different. And one of the things about it that I find really fascinating is if you read a lot of scholarly material, they don't talk a lot about Hecate. But if you read anything written by witches, it's there's volumes, right? So
there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a difficult amount to comprehend how much there actually is right now.
Yeah. And so I found that really fascinating. Like Walter Burkett's Greek religion is sort of, like the armchair historian's like maybe first source. And most of in that book, he's got like page profiles, like, 5 pages for each of the main Olympians and major deities. And there's like a Hecate paragraph, right? It's just so different from how a lot of witches see her. So that I really liked writing that. And Hermes, I really liked writing the Hermes stuff just because I think like some of the Hermes myths are amongst the funniest myths in Greek mythology, like when he steals Apollo's cattle, and he's like, I'm just a baby. I couldn't do that. I think that shit is riotously funny.
I don't have the capacity to steal as a god, even though I'm a baby, and I probably could steal as a god, even though I'm a baby. It is pretty funny.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think people realize how funny it is, though. Especially if you have a little baby voice in your head, like I'm a baby, I couldn't steal your cattle. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not possible, and yet here's the cattle got stolen.
And I love the hubris too. Like when he makes a sacrifice to the Olympians and he makes 12 sacrifices because he makes a sacrifice to himself because he's already including himself among that number. I'm like, that's badass shit right there.
That's some boss move.
Yeah. As a baby, right? I mean, that, you know. Yeah.
He's a baby. I'm gonna sacrifice to myself. It's cool. It's got it.
Yes. So those are favorites, yeah.
So when you were writing this, like, did you do any sort of ceremonies to kind of get more, round out the research with some personal experience? I mean, obviously you have some experience with Aphrodite, clearly.
I mean, I couldn't help but think I was working with them while I was writing about them. I felt like they were, invoke is a strong word, but I felt like they were present when I was writing about them. And I would pour libations out for them, or light some incense for them, or whatever it is. When you believe in the reality of the gods, it's easier to write about them because you can kind of feel their presence, right? I mean, it's not just an academic exercise. To me, a lot of this book felt like a devotional work, right? Like the gods were pushing me to write this book, and when I was writing about most of them, I could kind of feel them nearby. They're like towards the end, the bits get smaller. Like there's so many gods, and you can't write 15 pages on all of them. So like towards the end, when you're like writing paragraph descriptions of some of them, maybe I didn't feel their presence as much. But certainly the Olympians, most of the Titans that we wrote about, felt, you just knew that they were nearby. And it didn't mean that all of a sudden I was like running out and doing rituals for all of them, but you was doing like little mini things for most of them.
That's very interesting. Like almost it wasn't quite a full on invocation, but yeah, like most of them got libations and actually were able to connect to the current. So we're talking about stuff where it probably, it's going to come across in the writing, because it's like now it's not exactly just raw academic work. It's kind of not cherry picking, but you're picking which details based on the vibe too.
Yeah.
One of the things writing the book, though, like you worry about this a lot when you write about history, and this is probably my second book with a ton of history, is you don't want to sound like you're not a believer, because it's really easy, I think, to do that when you're writing about history, because it feels like you're writing about these deities in the past, right? Like this is what happened in Athens. But one of the things I love about the Greek gods is the story is going on. It didn't end when the Roman Empire fell apart, right? It didn't end in the year 500 or whatever. There are new stories that are being told. Whether or not people like Percy Jackson is irrelevant. To me, I don't think it would be like a successful series if the gods weren't at least a little bit happy with it, because it's kind of a new myth in its own way. It's a new story, and it brings people in. And
I think and I even think I read that in actual Greece, like they reopened a pagan temple recently, like an actual full on, like this is like they're readopting or reassimilating their religion officially, not officially at the state level yet, but enough that it's recognized, and there's legal temples there. So you're right. Those stories aren't ending, or those. It's probably on an upswing everywhere right now.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. But even if you go back 200 years ago, like Pan is probably my favorite god of all the gods, and he figures prominently in the Horde God book. But there was this movement in England to write about Pan as the god of the English countryside. 200 years ago. That's not really who he was to the ancient Greeks necessarily, because the English really sort of rounded down the sharper edges of Pan. So he wasn't just chasing nymphs all the time. But to me, what is that other than like kind of a continuation of the story? I mean, it's again, the gods just didn't stop being worshipped in 500 or being honored or being conceived of in ways, and that Pan is definitely an example of that. And then Hecate and her popularity in witchcraft circles today. I mean, that's a part of the story. Like the story just didn't end when the Roman Empire did. It's ongoing. When there's that much agency around a deity, there has to be a reason for it, right? And that's one of the things that I was really proud of in this book, is that we talked about those modern things. Because if you read scholarly books on the gods, oftentimes they just sort of stop, right? I mean, they just kind of stop after Christianization, or maybe they'll talk about how the gods were like viewed in some pieces of literature or whatever, or how they were portrayed in a couple of pieces of literature. But for me, it's like, how did these gods continue to be a part of religious practice? I mean, Artemis as Diana, that's a part of Aradia, right? And to me, Aradia, the Charles Leland book, is maybe the most important text of the entire modern witchcraft revival. And there she is in 1899, making an appearance. It's different, certainly, from how she was portrayed in Greek and Roman myth, but she's still there, right? Because, these stories are ongoing.
Right. And I think what you brought up is a very interesting idea. And it's one that, well, chaos magicians get slammed on for a while now, but it's like, Percy Jackson, like, why is this successful? Like, is the idea of Percy Jackson's Greek gods the actual Greek gods? And you're clearly leaning towards yes, their hand is there, which, if you know more about the Greek gods and how bards used to tell the stories of the Greek gods, is probably that's probably closer to what they were doing. They would go into a tavern and spin a story, and might have been mostly true, and then someone else would tell the story, and all of a sudden all these people are telling a story, and stuff like those movies, we cheapen them, but there very well could be something behind it, like, as in, that's a modern sort of story on that touches the energies and kind of brings it forward.
I also think that we have this weird idea about Greek mythology. We have weird ideas about Greek mythology, I think, because of things like Bulfinch's mythology and Edith Hamilton's mythology, that it is this very coherent story, with a beginning, and this is how these gods were born, and this is what they did. And the truth of the matter is, it was all very messy, and there were lots of different myths, and they often contradicted themselves. Even the two most important writers, Hesiod and Homer, contradict each other in matters of parentage and other things. So why can't there be lots of stories?
It's very difficult, actually, if you try to well, I think this comes part from the Western mindset in general, but in general, if you try to actually make the Greek gods fit into this narrow, very ceremonial, like, this is the way it is, and that's how the magic works, you realize there's stories that will contradict your convenient story that fits into a nice beautiful picture. The cosmology all falls apart, like, if you're that rigid, like, because there's multiple stories of how maybe one god has 5 different parents, in different stories, and all 5 gods make cosmological sense to have their parents be different. Like, you could actually see why it could be maybe a grandson, or maybe it's this god that was their grandmother, or maybe it's this, but it could make sense. You could see where that concept could spawn from that. And like, that's kind of, I think you're right. People don't understand the idea. They don't understand how the stories were told, I think. Like, there was 2 written down main accounts that you mentioned, but there's probably hundreds of other local stories that people were just spinning all the time, telling tales of different aspects of the gods.
And depending on what city-state you lived in ancient Greece, certain gods were honored in bigger ways in certain city-states, and in other city-states, certain gods were barely honored at all. Like Ares, for instance, was not a particularly popular god throughout most of Greece. But in Thebes, he was super important to people in Thebes, but not so much in Athens or even Sparta. So it was really different. And then, when you kind of throw in the Roman part too, then things also change. I mean, because Mars was, after Jupiter, was their most important god. And he was also an agricultural deity. And we always have this idea too, that the Roman and Greek deities are essentially the same. And the Roman deities kind of took the myths of the Greek deities, but in a lot of cases, they had very, very different functions, despite sharing those stories.
and in a lot of cases, you have a different government structure too, right? Which is like, in the Roman being far more centralized. Yes, they have like city-state gods, but they're still sort of, you still have the movement towards a centralized set of beliefs, like early on, and then you sort of historically see that a nice sort of growing bed for what would later be Christianity, because the attempt to centralize or use religion as a centralized unifying topic of the empire was an easy switch over to Christianity later, which the Greeks didn't seem to exactly do. They didn't kind of standardize or agree from city-state to city-state on which god should be honored or any of it.
Well, the one unifying force was Zeus, though. I mean, like everything goes back to Zeus. There's the reason that Zeus is, all of his illegitimate children are on Mount Olympus is you're coming into this area and they have this god and you have to get it to link up to Zeus, right? I mean, that's the fascinating thing about the Olympians. And yeah, Greek religion has all these contradictions, but at the center of it, though, in the classical era and all that was always Zeus. Everything had to come back to Zeus in some sort of way. But it wasn't, but you're right, though. It's not like Rome, though, when they were almost like looking for like a monotheism, right, to keep everybody together or a shared set of beliefs.
Right.
The Greeks just had Zeus.
And then Zeus had multiple conflicting stories that very conflicting and different personalities depending on who's telling the story.
Very much.
Well, one of the things too, like writing the book, which was really fascinating, is sometimes how gods were worshipped was really different from how they were written about in myth. And Zeus is a really great example of that. I remember having to like, oh God, I have to write the history of Zeus. That's not going to be fun at all because Zeus feels remote, right? I mean, he's probably the god that has the most in common with like a monotheistic god. And as the leader of the gods, the one in charge of everything, there's this sternness to Zeus, right? Like you don't think of Zeus as, hey, let's go out and hang out and have fun. It's more like, I'm Zeus. I'm going to tell everybody what to do. I'm going to turn into a golden cloud and go have sex with somebody, right? And so not relatable. I mean, I can't turn into a golden cloud. But reading about how people worshipped Zeus, though, like they called him things like friend, right? Like people had these very deep and personal relationships with Zeus that most people that I know in the pagan world just, don't have that type of relationship with a god like Zeus. It always tends to be, one of the other Olympians or a Hecate or a Pan. And to me, that was fascinating, right? And it made me look at Zeus in an entirely different light. Hera is another one too. Like you read the mythology of Hera, it's just Hera tormenting Zeus's illegitimate children, right? And you wouldn't think, wow, like anybody would love Hera, and she was beloved. She was somebody that you wanted in your corner. She was somebody
the mythology. There's some mythology when you actually read into it a little more from magical points of view. If you wanted a happy house or a wealthy house, you have to go to Hera, like, and you have to get her favor to be happy and wealthy. So it's like, in practical, like the mythology might make her look like that, but you're right. In any sort of practical magic, like she who controls the home, it controls almost all of your happiness. Like, yes. I mean, in a way, like, even if you have a home with two gay guys, if you're allowing, Hera to be the controller of the house, the god who controls the house, like, I mean, there's other goddesses that sort of also have a claim on that, but seriously, like Hera, like was, you're right. Well, when she's in her positive side, when she's in her when you get to her positive aspect, it's all about wealth and happiness. Like I mean, maybe some people don't want to be wealthy or happy, I guess, but
I mean, like Heracles, you don't think of him as liking Hera at all. But I mean, Hera is in the name Heracles, and Heracles means something like he who finds glory through Hera, right? I mean, somewhere along the line, everything like that original story got lost, and we have this other story of her being mean all the time, But you know,
or it could be a reinterpretation of that story. Like even the fact that would we know his name if she had not tormented him, right? Like, would we even know their name? Would he even be a hero right now if that didn't happen? Like, as in, like, would like
no laborers
sort of
do you get any fame?
Right? Like, it's like the Jesus story. Do we know Jesus if the spear of Longitis doesn't go in? Like,
yeah,
that's
you know.
We can have a long argument about that, but really, like, in a way, if you just approach that differently, you can see, like, do we really know this entity, this great hero, if the story wasn't set up?
I mean, there has to be an antagonist and there has to be a protagonist, right, to have a great story. But they were also worshipped together at certain points, and not sort of in that antagonist-protagonist way. But again, it's just fascinating to me, like, sort of the differences. And you go in with biases. You know, this is I didn't have relationships with all the Greek gods before I started this book, right? So, you know, some I knew more about than others. And when you're doing the research on Zeus and Hera, and you find things out that you didn't know, you know, it's pretty exciting. It was really fun. That, you know, it was one of the best parts of writing a book, is that journey that you go on as a writer and the things that you learn while you're writing.
Well, it's almost 6:50 or so. What do you have coming up besides Convocation being next week? Which, even though I'm not going this year, if you go to Convocation, it's a fun time. So you should go to Convocation in Detroit.
I know.
Seriously.
I remember nights drinking Cuban rum with you at Convocation.
There you go.
Haitian. Usually I bring Haitian rum.
Haitian rum, yeah. It was, you know, it's kind of sad. You were like such a part of my experience there for so long.
You know what? Just convince him. You can tell him, get him back. Just pay for his travel. I'll come next year. You know,
next year.
They do.
Zach will come do some Asian rituals again. I mean, not.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
That's
well,
what
I
he
did.
does.
I did. That's what I do.
Eventually, we'll get our Buddhist book done, and then like have a weird Buddhist book, and everyone in the pagan community be like, "Why did Andrieh write a Buddhist book, like practical Buddhist magic? Like, what the hell is going on with Andrieh?
What the hell is this?"
like, you know, I'm in East Chinatown with Zach in Toronto for a reason. Like, that's why we're here. East Chinatown.
No, the story goes, you went up a mountain and whatever else from that point on.
Yeah, well, we are on the 4th floor, so I guess that's
we
true.
are on the 4th floor.
But Convocation is what? Go ahead, Jason.
That is like a mountain, the 4th floor, especially if you're taking the stairs.
Oh, it is. Those are big. Those are long stairs coming up here. Yeah. That's why we got elevator too.
But Convocation is a great party, and it's not just a party. Like, there's lots of good classes there. You could get something for everyone, really. Like, it's kind of crazy. You know, you have that one coming up. So what classes are you going to teach there next week?
I am doing a thing called Magic in Your Kitchen, about like magical stuff in your kitchen. Obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory. Look at the Horn God in modern witchcraft practices, most specifically Wiccan witchcraft and traditional witchcraft. I'm doing a ritual for the Witch Father, which is the sort of traditional witchcraft version of the Horn God. And then I'm doing a panel where I'm just going to say nonsense and drink whiskey for an hour. So that's going to be really fun. It's like not supposed to be serious. It's supposed to just be having a good time. Yeah.
All right.
And then,
all right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Then the next weekend I go to Austin, Texas for Austin Witch Fest, and Pagonicon in Minneapolis, Minnesota over St. Patrick's Day weekend, March 17th through 19th. The following weekend, I'm in Boxborough, Massachusetts for the Magical Marketplace and Psychic Fair. Like, yeah, things are crazy. And then April 7th through 9th, I'm going to the Spring Mysteries in Seattle, Washington, which is like kind of a recreation of Eleusis and stuff. So that'll be fun.
Moving on up.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So, Zach, what do we have coming up for the store? I think next weekend we decided to do a ritual, didn't we?
We did. We're doing Michael Archangel Ritual to Purify Negativity next weekend. And then after that, we have either a ritual or workshop happening every week. So after that, for the Michael, on the 4th, we have Pendulum Divination for Beginners. Then we have a Ganesh ritual with Andrieh, and then it continues all the way down. So if you're interested in that, we will be getting the descriptions up very shortly, so you can take a look for our sponsors. But you have something every weekend.
So how do they become a sponsor, Zach?
They can go to QueenCityCurio.com/membership, and they can check out the memberships there. And then once, depending on the membership they get the 10 sponsor, we will email you the link afterward for the back 3 years of workshops and rituals we've done. So again, it goes QueenCityCurio.ca/pages/become a member.
Right. And if people are wondering, for the people who are members watching and who listen to the podcast, which are more people who listen to podcasts, we're going to change that once we get back in live radio. I guarantee it. But thank you for being a sponsor. You help us keep the lights on, and all the sponsors also help us build a library to have an actual public library of occult materials for Toronto. Right now, we're about 1,500 books of actual occult library books, some of which are actually increasing, yes, and some of those books are actually pretty rare, like the Hyatt books and some other books that we have in the library. I mean, some of the books are obviously esoteric Buddhism books, but they're also pretty rare.
They're pretty rare. We hunted for those.
There's rare voodoo books. There's rare Barden books that you cannot find, rare editions. There's some rare books in our particular collection. Books. Yeah, rare Hecate books. So it's not like it's just the easy to get books or the ones that authors give us. Although we really like it when authors Llewellyn can give us a copy of, show it again, Jason. There we go. Modern Witchcraft with the Greek Gods. Llewellyn, you could give us a copy of that. We can get it in the library. We kind of like that library, although not everyone can take books out. Anyone can come here anytime we're open and peruse the books at any time. We just let them go in there and kind of just look at the book. But if you're a sponsor, you could check books out.
Yep.
So again, we try to give a chance for people to check out the authors we have on the show in our live center, as opposed to just necessarily buying the Amazon book, which you could do. You should buy the author's books. But, if you want to check it out first, generally speaking, we try to get them. And if we know you're interested in something, we know that the patrons are interested in something, we go out and get books on that topic to kind of, if there's a couple people interested. So we're very responsive to actually and we have a book budget in addition to the books that we get from everyone to kind of build up the library. So come by. That's the point. And if you're in the Toronto area and you're just visiting, 607 Gerrard Street, come here. If you want a divination or anything, we're open. We can fit you in.
Suite 401, 402. We're on the 4th floor.
That's right. And in case you're wondering, if you listen to the show, we don't have the Wish Shrine done yet. We do have the Shrine to the Ancestors done. And as she has mentioned today, once again, there's multiple Hecate artifacts inside of it that you can kind of work with to work with the dead at our kind of public death shrine. And believe it or not, you wouldn't believe how many people just come up on our 4th floor and they sit there, put some fruit there and meditate with their ancestors. So we're real serious about the community service in Toronto. We're setting up these altars. They are real. And if anyone has been at any of my rituals, they know they're not weak. As in, we worked on this for months to make sure we could have a public place for people to do ancestor work or work with the dead. And it's there. Like I said, the Wish Shrine is still being built, but there'll be a second Wish Shrine that no cost. You just come up here, meditate, do what you're going to do as part of the service to community. You don't even have to tell us you're there. You don't have to buy anything. You just come up there, walk back there, and just do what you're going to do. There's instructions from a QR code, so everything's right there. People keep donating to the altars. And so like it really is a living community altar. People donated candles, people donated talismans for actually two of the gods that we talked about today were actually people have donated talismans to be part of that altar process, which is Hecate and Hermes. Obviously, Hermes being a psychopomp to the dead. People donated like Hermes actual artifacts they made for the altar, and they intended it for be used by the community. So like really, if you're here in Toronto or if you're visiting, stop by, and if you need coffee or something, we could just give you some coffee to give the dead or something, so it's really kind of thank you for that. And officially, I think the second shrine, not the wish shrine, but the second shrine has started, and it's actually got a living god. We have the Buddha, the Sun Buddha. I forgot his exact name. What's the exact name, Zach? Danichi. Like, is the first entity appropriately the creator Buddha is there, and it's in a public space near the elevator. That's a public shrine, and it's real. Really, it's been through blessings, extensive blessings. So, like, if you need to connect to the Buddhist spirits too, it's here. It's public. Just come out and take a look. Again, you don't have to buy anything. You can just sit there and kind of pray and, get what you need. And that's
we've already had people go to the Buddhist altar and start doing prayers. We've seen that. So
right, we've seen many people sit out there and do prayers, and actually, come out looking pretty good. So, or come out looking better than when we saw them kind of walk to the elevator. So again, public shrines, we're building them for you to actually kind of come here. Please do. We hope to see everyone, and like we always say, everyone have a great night. Stay safe and stay well. I know all my coworkers just got COVID this week, even though we're all remote. So doubly stay well.
Doubly stay
as well as Paul. And if you're at convocation, just ask them to come ask me to come next year, and I'll do it.
I'll do some bugging. I'll do some bugging for you.
There we go. Thanks for coming on the show, Jason. Like, if you have another book, which it seems like you're getting one every 6 months, we'd love to have you come back on.
Yep. It's gonna be a while before the next one. I'm doing a long project right now, so I'm gonna have a year without a book coming out. It's quite weird and kind of liberating.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, also last thing, July 1st starts the Goetia immersion class, as in we will summon every one of the Goetia every 2 weeks in order, with also doing every one of the Shemaforish every 2 weeks.
Hardcore.
Right. Every 2 weeks with a packet for each and every spirit that we're going to put together. Doesn't get better than that. And yes, we'll have a public Semaforish altar and Goetia altar that we will set up after the 3-year period, when we've gone through and summoned and blessed and consecrated every single seal. Yes, we will have a public space where you can use our seals if you would like to get down with some of these spirits or names of God. So there you go.
Fun times.
And with that, fun times. And with that, we'll see everyone next week. Hang on a second, Jason, and we'll kind of let us take it on out.